Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 488th edition of Tranquility du Jour, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Tranquility du Jour is a series of nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. In this week's edition, I chat with Ludid Ryu about her creative process, rituals, tools, and so much more. Over the past few weeks, actually almost 2 months now, I've been sharing the 8 Tranquility seasonal, monthly, weekly tools, and this week we'll be featuring the daily. And one of the weekly tools that I mentioned last week, and I'm showcasing them over on Instagram and Facebook, which is at Tranquility du Jour, but the videos are over on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tranquility du Jour. Anyway, one of them for last week's was taking an artist date, right? Which is based on Julia Cameron's work in The Artist's Way, encouraging us to take 1 to 2 hours each week solo that we spend nourishing our creative spirit. And no one does this just more impressively and regularly than Ludid. And I love her Instagram feed. I'm constantly inspired by it. I have a little snapshot of it for you in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/488. So prepare to be inspired. I think you're just going to love Ludid and all of her wonderful inspiration and information. Now, those of you who are new to Tranquility du Jour, welcome, and you can learn more about us in the show notes. There's a link to our Start Here page. Also, save the date. June 21st is our next online gathering. I do these every season, and I have been doing them for, I think about 15 years now. And the idea is just to come together as a community for an hour on a Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's a free event, and I share 8 tips for the season, 8 tranquility tips. So save the date, June 21st, and you can sign up over at kimberlywilson.com. And then there's also, of course, a link in today's show notes. Now, if you are planning next year and getting excited about the possibility of adventure, next June, I will be taking a group to Provence and then also a group to Paris. There are 2 spots left in Paris, and there's about 5 spots in Provence. Details in the show notes, and of course, over at kimberlywilson.com. Would love to show you my adventure over into France, and this may be my last France retreats. So if you are interested in exploring it Tranquility du Jour style, now is your time to join us. Also, I just want to say a big shout out and love to everyone. Last week, I wrote a blog post just highlighting the resilience that I'm seeing in everyone right now, from acclimating to Zoom calls to, being at home in a much smaller kind of localized world. And I am not going to say this is easy by any means, but I really have been blown away with the resilience of all of you. And I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And I also shared a few tips and ideas and things that I've noticed along the way too. And I'll put a link in today's show notes to that blog post. And I hope that it's also helpful and inspiring to you, as I know this is a hard time. This is a really hard time with 15% unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's just so much going on. And I just want to encourage you to, now more than ever, really double down on the self-care and the tranquility tools. And especially today's podcast, all this wonderful juice around creativity, because honestly, we need this more than ever right now. Ludid. As a young girl, she spent hours painting squares with watercolors on school paper and doodling on the margins on her multiplication table's homework. As a quiet teenager, writing fan letters to actor Sean Astin and enjoying making mobiles in the ever-struggling math class. As a graduate teaching assistant, thrilled about creating a teaching notebook with all kinds of lesson plans and activities. As a mom, carving out time here and there to dabble and learn ways to boost her creativity. As an artist publishing artwork and an article in Somerset Studio and Somerset Life in the mid-2000s, as well as self-publishing a book of poems alongside abstract paintings called Bounce with a local writer and friend in 2013. And these days mindfully moving between visual journaling, making sketchbooks, and writing while paying attention to what lights her up. Welcome, Ludid.
Hello, Kimberly.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. You know, I have been following you on Instagram for a while, and I was trying to remember, how did I first come across you? And I think it's because you sent me something gorgeous via snail mail a few years ago. And I just love your creative process. And so that's why I was like, I must have you on the show to chat creativity. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was wonderful to receive that and follow your journey and being here talking to you now. Thank you.
So let's chat about your journey into creativity, because your creative space, the way in which you create, it seems like it's a very big part of your life. Like there's always beautiful new updates. So can you give us a little background on your journey into creativity?
Sure. I can start with my first recollection with creativity. And that's when, I used to sit by myself in the courtyard of the church parsonage because my father was a Methodist minister. So I would just gather the paints and paper because he had paints and paper also because he's an artist as well. And as a child, so I used to just dabble and paint, sketch with his tools. And but I remember having my first Bible that was my own, and it had this black cover. And I would always try to be the first in finding the stickers in the box of my favorite cereal and put the stickers on the cover of the Bible. And I know that's so inappropriate for sure, but I did it anyway. And I think perhaps it was a way for me to kind of document that this book that I read every day deserved some kind of embellishment, but stickers were important for me, so I thought they would go well on it. But now that I think about those little experiences back then, that's when I think I started discovering for myself that the practice of documenting, right, even though I had no idea that that's what I was doing back then, because I have a book that I bought for myself. It's the first book I ever bought for myself that was called Talking with the Animals. And I was 9 years old. And I have on the margins, I have pencil markings and underlines of words that I liked. And so I think at that point, I was kind of needing some place to write down notes. And so I think when I think back, I think that's when I was kind of starting to get a little feel of, the writing and documenting and, being creative in that way. And I'm a pretty quiet and reflective person. And although some people would describe me as shy, I felt it didn't really fit who I was, but I am quiet and reflective. But, I always wondered how I could work with that. Because I always viewed it as sort of a weak link, but like it was some kind of fragile characteristic, and it would be my struggle forever. But I think that, that strength of the strength of quietness could be perhaps being a good listener. I'm not sure, but I realized that my way to show up was through creativity, and that it would enable me to perhaps bring out and use my reflective nature in some way.
Yeah. You know what I love about this is that it started kind of with, with the Bible. And I remember, my mother in church, she would always write, in the margins too, taking notes from the sermon. And of course, I'd be writing in my Bible, I love Axl Rose, like ridiculous, stuff. Like you do not want to see my Bible from the 80s. Right. But, it's like, it's a using books, doing this with books. Like I will not read a book without a pen. Like I must have a pen to underline. And tried to adjust to the Kindle, by doing the highlighting. It's not quite the same as pen on paper. So I love that that's kind of where this started, and it gave you an outlet for your reflective nature.
I think that's how I started to approach creativity, like that would be the journey, right? To leave all these small little traces along the way through what I enjoy, playfully, and perhaps be a quiet spark in some way for others.
And how did your creative process evolve over the years? So starts in childhood, kind of writing in margins, and then, how did it evolve as you got older?
I started, I'm trying to think back when it was after I had my child, my son, and I just started, I started finding all the Somerset Studio magazines. They're just, they're wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And I just started looking through those and seeing things that I could try, and just kind of really started with creative play, right? And it just kind of took over. That's where it kind of started, and using those ways to try to dabble in different things, and taking courses and really focusing on trying to see where I would fit in all of these different places that we could be, right? With either mixed media, or, making journals, or, painting. And I dabbled in many, many things. And I think just in the last 2 years is when I have really focused on the things that are the ones that I really enjoy, that I feel that are part of my creative practice, that I would do them anyway. Even if like I couldn't, that I would try to find a way to do those. And so that's kind of where, it began, and where I am now.
And, I love the idea of dabbling. And I think, though, it can be really hard for, some of us who are like, I don't know, I'm going to take up painting and be like the next Monet, right? And then you're like, actually, I'm really, I can't even get, the basics, right? And so how do you approach it in a way that is less intimidating, right? Because those Somerset magazines are freaking amazing, but it's just like, it also produces a lot of like, I don't know, creativity envy.
Yes, it's true. And I think that it took me a long time to get to the point where I could not be like triggered by certain things, because I had to plan a response for some things, because I would go down this rabbit hole of, inspiration, and I would start doing other things that I didn't expect I would be doing. And then I would go buy all of the materials that we needed for that particular, painting, for example. And I bought all these paints, and I would try a little while, and then I would like, well, okay. And then I would go do something else. So I think to focus, I needed to know what was it that, triggers me down a rabbit hole, and to be on high alert for those things, and be ready with a response. Some of those responses would be like, sometimes I would just look at something, and without having to try it, I would say, well, maybe all I need to do is to acknowledge the work of the artist and praise their work. And that might be the only way that I can kindle the spark, right? Just simply thanking or praising their work. And that would be enough, without me having to try those things. Also, in setting a time limit on how much I would spend on the inspiration seeking, right? And how I didn't want to be stuck in there forever, but I would set certain time limit and say, well, I'm going to spend this time to see what I find, and with that curiosity, just let it flow. But then say, okay, I need to stop right now and focus on the work, right, that I needed to do. And also, I think that honoring what my intentions are. I think, just saying, this is what I'm working on. This is what I know that I like, and that's it, right? Period. I didn't put my head down and then just dig deep, and it's difficult. I think I still struggle with it, right? Because there's so much wonderful things out there, and but I think there was a quote one time that I read by a business author, and he said that if everything is important, nothing is.
Right.
So I try, whenever I feel like I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, I just say, if everything's important, nothing is, right? And just kind of try to focus on the work that I need to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. I'm reading a book called The One Thing, right, by Gary Keller, I think. And it's exactly what you're saying. If you try to focus on everything, like I'm going to do watercolor and mixed media and collage, and what I guess mixed media is kind of all of that. But,
Yes.
It's like sculpture, gardening.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, love it, love the enthusiasm. And then how do we rein it in and be like, okay, I want to dabble in X.
Yes. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your creative process, because it seems that you are creating daily. At least that's my impression from Instagram. And so can you give us a little run through of your creative process? Like, do you start your day with it? Do you fit it in the margins of your day?
Well, I don't start with it because I have a day job, and I start from 7 a.m. until about 3:30. And so, but throughout that time, I listen to podcasts, and I do get up and take my walks and just observe and all of those. But my natural inclination is to piece things together. So whether it's like making a sketchbook or visual journaling or writing, I'm always trying to absorb information where I can write down little bits and pieces of letting in as much as I can what I feel is makes me excited, enthusiastic, whether it's a phrase or something like that. And so throughout the day, I'm just gathering all these information. So when I finish my work, then I can take that however much time I have. So sometimes I may just have 10 minutes or 1 hour. Sometimes I have an entire day that I can just, be in my studio. But having that moment to really gather and document, even if they're one-liners, that I can take it to my writing session or my creating session, then I'm ready for something. I always try to have something that I'm ready. So if I just have 10 minutes, at least I have that one phrase that really caught my attention during the day, and I'm going to work on that.
So you have like a prompt, almost a jumping off point based on what you come across that day that inspires you. Yes.
And that's how it begins. And once I have all that gathering, during the day, I usually try to just pull it all back in my mind, right? And just focus on the work that I need to do. But with all these little, fragments or phrases or insights or an image or something that I saw when I was walking, like a situation or, little personalities of the birds that you can observe. I think all of those things just come together in some way that allows me to be, whether it's in my sketchbook or in my notebook to write, that all of these things are coming together in some way, and I'm starting to kind of piece things together.
Now, do you have rituals kind of with your creative process? Like, I have to make my cup of tea. I need to light a candle. I need to close my studio door.
Yes, I do close my door, and I never turn on the main light. I just turn on my lamp. And if it's raining, I do open the blinds and I pull the curtains. But if it's not, I close them, because I don't know. The sun I always, my husband doesn't understand when I mention this, but I say I have a complicated relationship with the sun. It just, it doesn't, um, it, whenever I need to get into the studio, I have to really work hard when it's sunny and bright, because I think that the rain just creates this mood that I feel that I need. And so that's one of the things that I kind of need. And I might put on some background music with some rain in the background to kind of help me get into the mood with that. But I always try to cut and paste things that I have on my desk. Just kind of, what's on my desk, what can I work with, and just going to start with that. And usually from that, other things emerge, whether it takes me to the notebook or continuing doing some type of work in the sketchbook. Then those are the little things that I can do with my hands, right? That kind of lead me to like creating, and the things that also that I share right on Instagram as well.
Now, do you have like a pile of ephemera that's always on your desk to pull from?
Yes, I do. And I actually, I had to put, sometimes I just leave them out on the desk because I know that the next day I can ask myself, what can I work with here? But whenever it gets a little out of control, I have a box where I can just dump them up in there and work from that. And usually they're small pieces that I can use as tabs for my sketchbook. I love putting tabs in my notebook and my sketchbook to kind of guide me, help me find what I need. And I usually like to make them from just scraps of paper, just fold them the way they are and tear them. I love the torn edges and things like that, to just make it seem and feel more like handmade, right? That nothing too precious, just this is what I have, and this is what I'm going to use for that. So
I love torn edges, right? And I think for some people, it's really hard to step away from the scissors, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes if I might use a ruler, if I want a straight edge but not so straight, then I can use a ruler to kind of guide me, just rip it. But it kind of, gives that effect, but doesn't just go all over the place and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Now, what about the tools you have, right? So you mentioned ephemera. It looks like you've got a lot of like cool pens. I mean, just like seeing the writing over things. All of your notebooks are gorgeous. Like, what are the tools that you're like, okay, if you wanted to start a creative process of mixed media, this is what you need?
For me, I have a big Sharpie, one of those king size Sharpies that I love. I can just, make huge letters and write over anything. And I think you like Sharpies as well, right?
Yes.
To kind of go over, yes. And this king size one is one of my favorites. I also use a lot of the India ink with the brushes and on my sketchbook and also on paper to just kind of make covers for sketchbooks. And the paper that I like to use is really just anything that I find that really feels good in my hand, really. And the craft paper is one of my favorites also. But one thing I like to do is when I go to the library, I look in the all the magazines that are on there to donate, $1, 50 cents. And there's some that are from the local area that are for art. And sometimes they have this paper it's different. It feels really nice. So I get the magazine just for that. So I come home and I rip it apart, and then I use it for my own sketchbook and to book, to bind it together, and I use that. And I have a lot of pens that I use. I just try different ones I like to try different ones and see which one, fit well with, feel well in my notebook and my sketchbooks. And so
yeah,
those are some of the main ones.
Yeah, so it's not like anything fancy, really.
No. There's, I think many years ago, I would go to the store a lot and buy all kinds of things and, stickers. I ended up with so many stickers, and I realized that I would never use them because I would just look at a magazine and, find something and I just rip it and use that. And, or little things that I would, that we get from the mail, and some nice image that I would see, and I would rip that off and use that. And a little just collage elements that that I can incorporate in my sketchbook. Like I can form pages from a book. I can make little envelopes and inserts, and I would use those to to use in my sketchbooks. And so, yeah, just kind of ripping anything that I have and using what I have. Now, many years ago, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would always like, oh, I need to buy this. I can't do this because I need to buy this. But now I feel like I can look around and find something that I can use.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because just recently I got, I don't know, some accordion like style promo brochure in the mail. And I was like, oh, I am so saving this to Art Journal because it's like, you already have this built-in layered piece, right? And then you just cover it.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is perfect. So listeners, like your junk mail can become a wonderful piece of ephemera.
Yes. And, a lot of times you can cover up with just a blank sheet of paper and cover up part of the image, right? And you just kind of make it a little bit your own and write, journal on top of that. And so, just kind of playing around with different types of papers in those.
Now, you mentioned making your own sketchbooks, and your books are so freaking amazing. Like, you must have dozens of these. And how do you make these?
Right. Well, it's the creative project that excites me the most, bookbinding. And I don't consider myself a bookbinder, like, professional or anything like that, but I enjoy making the sketchbooks. And, I'll just piece together materials in some way or another. Sometimes when I have stacks of pages and, I can invite that exploration on how to hold these pages together. So I say, I have some tape here that I can use, or maybe, I'll use glue this time, anything like that will work. But the sketchbooks that I normally make are the oversewn tape technique, and where you just, have some kind of, it's like this, it looks like tape, but it's fabric, and you're just kind of putting it over the cover and stitching all the pages, right, one at a time. And it's a very calming thing for me to do also, because I can just take my time and make sure that I'm, putting the pages together and I haven't skipped certain things. But using the wax linen thread is what I use. And it's a very playful journey for me. I like using papers that watercolor paper or old and discarded pages. And I was actually listening to a Korean calligrapher a couple of months ago describe how in his calligraphy practice, whenever he's making a piece he's created and it doesn't work and he makes a mistake, he throws it away. And then he makes a mistake again and he throws it away. And I was thinking, oh, I'll take those. I can use those pages, because, they're great. I can make a sketchbook with those pages, and usually looking around to see how you can make it your own, right? And that's the most important thing for me. There is to that process and looking for what I can use this time for making a sketchbook. And yes, I have a lot of them. Sometimes I have to think about how to, the storage, and it gets a little overwhelming sometimes. But it's a process that I enjoy very much.
Yeah, do you have different sizes, or do you have a particular size you love to work in? Because I like a big one because then I can, put full page images from magazines in there. But then I also love the small ones. I think those are like a 4x6 that spiral. I really like those.
Yes, I do have different sizes, and um, uh, they range from, and I think it comes from like what was available, and this seemed like it would fit for a small one, so I create a small one, or a big one. But yeah, I think it sometimes I like the small journals or the sketchbooks to work with. And sometimes I need, right, something bigger where I can do a huge spread and just play around with the whole, right, both pages and just, when you open it up and have all that space to work with. And sometimes just something small works. But yes, they vary in sizes.
Now, what recommendation would you give to listeners who are interested in kind of starting their own creative process or practice?
Yes. Well, I think for me, something that has helped me a great deal in my process was the creative play, right? In allowing yourself to play and discover the tools that you enjoy, that you like working with, and seeing where all those invitations, what it can bring, right? A lot of what the play invites is just being able to not be so precious with things, and really focus on that process of playing. Like a sandbox, I guess, right? This is my playtime and I'm just going to play. And I think that's an important part of the process that has been helpful for me. Right? It's my daily dose of creative play, and let yourself meander and, mindfully move between projects, whether it's, writing and then go back and play, and, but setting that time specifically for that exploration to see where it could lead. And I think that's an important part of my process that I've been able to enjoy and discover a lot of things about what I enjoy and what I want to focus on.
And I think you raise a good point, because sometimes, and I think this is what you're saying, is that, sometimes you may be in the mood to write. Sometimes you may be in the mood to cut. Sometimes you may be in the mood to paint. Sometimes you may be in the mood to, layer. And so I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, I have to sit down and do like a full process. But, sometimes it's just like, no, I'm just going to pull images and have them pulled together for my next spread, or I'm just going to paint a background, or I'm just going to do my writing over the images today. Is that how you tend to operate?
Yes. Just little bits at a time here and there. I rarely come to my space and say, I'm going to work on this and only this. Because I've learned that blocks a lot of what I need to do. So I come in and I try to play around a little bit, and then I say, okay, I think I'm ready to move to this other project, and I'll write for a while. And whenever I feel like there's some kind of like, okay, this isn't working very well, then I might switch to my sketchbook and play around and move from rip paper and play with images, and using that time to just allow yourself to move through your projects, and not feel like I have to sit down and work on this and that's it. I think that has allowed me to just kind of really play around and make my practice precious in that way, that it's that I'm playing and I can move through these projects in a joyful way.
my last question for you is, the name of the podcast is Tranquility du Jour, and I think we know how you find your tranquility in every day, but I'm curious, how would you answer that question?
Well, whenever I think about tranquility, I think of like the soul, right? And I can't separate my faith from my creativity or anything else. So whenever I'm more connected to my faith, that's when I feel the most grounded and peaceful. There's a quote, if you don't mind, that I like to share, because it's a one that's during this time that we're kind of in globally. I read it actually the other day, and it just brought a little bit of calmness and more peace. And it's from a book or published from about success and inspiration. From the Success Company, but it's on a dark night and in a dangerous place where the footing is insecure, a lantern in the hand is worth a dozen stars. So that really invited me to ask the question as, what is my lantern? What is your lantern? What is our lantern? Right? Or who is my lantern? Who is your lantern and our lantern? And that, just kind of brings me down a little bit to have that moment of reflection and peace and tranquility. And I think, that the answer has the potential to help us walk through and to peace and some tranquility.
I love that. Finding your lantern. Yeah. There's that saying too, and I'm so paraphrasing, but it's a great, oh gosh, it's like a quote about being the candle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Listeners, I will find it and put it in, because I'm like, what is it? But it's so great. But, it's how like your, how the candle shows in the darkness, something. I am so paraphrasing. It's way more beautiful than what I'm saying. But yes, I love that. Great. Well, thank you so much, Ludid, for sharing your process and your beautiful work. And listeners, I'll have a link to our Instagram page where I think you too will be inspired. And thank you again for reaching out so many years ago and for being on the show.
Thank you, Kimberly, for the invitation to be part of your podcast. I enjoy it every time that it comes out, and thank you for your insight and your day-to-day example. It's been wonderful for my creative life as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Find our guest. You'll find a link to her Instagram account in the show notes, which again is at kimberlywilson.com/488. And that is Ludid Ryu, LUDIDRYU. And then there's also a link to the blog post I mentioned about the resiliency that I'm observing right now. And just a few tips and things that I'm finding particularly helpful, and also asking myself, what is it that I want to take away from this experience and keep internalized? Because I will say, like over the weekend, I was reading a lot about do less, your one thing, like these books, that are all about like really simplifying things down. And, I feel like this experience has really pushed me into that process of really looking at many different things that I'm committed to or involved in, and asking myself, what is the best, most valuable use of my time, energy, resources, etc. So I hope that the blog post is helpful and encouraging you to kind of do the same right now, just taking that step back, because this is a pause that we have been kind of forced into. And is there any way that we can learn from this and embody some juice from it? So let's connect. There is a lot of links in the show notes. And I request, if you have a moment, to share a review of this podcast over on iTunes, Amazon, or Goodreads. I would be so, so grateful. And Amazon and Goodreads, of course, that's for my books. And there's information about that and links to all of this at kimberlywilson.com/review. Also, you can find the 487 previous podcast episodes at KimberlyWilson.com/podcast, where there's also an app for Tranquility du Jour for iPhone and Androids. Also, links to subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Sign up for Love Notes that go out weekly with little doses of inspiration and kind of like you're the first to know if you're in this list about what is going on, what is happening. And it also gives you access to Tranquil Treasures, which is this resource of many, many things, such as PDFs, videos, etc. There's a link to my 6 books, ways to find me on social media, which is all at Tranquility du Jour, and then a link to my seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion line Tranquility, where I'm now doing a sale of all our colors because we're going to start phasing colors out. So they're 25% off, and there's a link in the show notes for that. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. I wish you a delightful week ahead. Namaste.